So we have the pattern piece that is 2 pieces for the sleeve. You only need to have it go up to the squiggly line. This is the placket pattern. You can cut this in 2 pieces. Then we have the sleeve cuff. You really only need to cut the interfacing accurately. The other 2 pieces just need to be substantially larger than the actual pattern piece. This is how the 2 pieces of the placket will lay onto the pattern piece. Note that the slit ends 1/2 inch below the pattern piece. Here I'm drawing the line for the slit to cut the pattern piece. When you cut the slit, it's a good idea to stop at least 1 inch below the pattern piece. You really only need 1/2 inch, but stop an inch for better. Note that everything is wrong sides facing you. The big placket piece goes on the big side, small on the small side, everything wrong side. Now I'm going to start sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance of the big placket. I will go in a U shape. Sewing the big placket, keep the seam allowance 1/2 inch and very straight. Stop 1/2 inch before the top of the big placket. Leave your needle down. Then line up the small placket with the big placket. Drop your presser foot and sew across until you're 1/2 inch past the edge of the small placket. Leave your needle down, twist. Sew straight down, 1/2 inch seam allowance till the end. Now you need to cut into the corners. Make sure you cut all the way into the corners. It's okay if you clip the stitches. Don't cut much past, but if you go a little bit past the corners, it's okay. But you must cut all the way. Here you can iron up the little triangle so it stays in place. Now I'm going to flip it over and turn the large and small placket pieces out to the other side. Once they are turned out, open the small placket and press the seam towards the center. The center is where the slit is. Then on the edge of the small placket, you want to crease a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Fold it over with your hands, 1/4 inch, and then press with the iron. Take your time and make it accurate. Once you press that seam, then fold it over just a little bit past the stitching. The goal here is to hide the stitching with the placket. On the large placket side, again, fold the crease into the middle and then fold a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the opposite side. Then fold it over to cover the previous stitching. Steam it all the way down and make a nice square rectangle. Now I'm going to stitch the small placket. Stitch up along the edge, making sure that you pull the placket over in front of the bottom stitching. Take your time to stitch right along the edge. Now I have both of the placket pieces here with the bottom one stitched. I will pick up the top part of the big placket and fold it in half to make a triangle and then in half again to make a point. Make sure this is symmetrical and then press it with an iron. This is what it looks like on the inside. Note where that stitching is. That's the top of the slit. We need to start our needle on the opposite side. Here's the open side. Note where my needle is. I will start stitching across right at the top of the slit. When I get to the edge of the placket, I'll leave my needle down, lift my presser foot, and pivot. Now I will start sewing to the top. Sew right along the edge, and when you get to the corner, leave your needle down, and you'll pivot. Lift your presser foot, pivot, and sew up to the top of the point. Leave your needle down, pivot, and then sew to the next point. Pivot once again. This time we're going to sew 1/4 inch past the previous stitching. Sew the 1/4 inch past, then sew across. When you get to the edge, pivot and sew 1/4 inch up. Pivot and then continue sewing all the way down the large placket piece. When you reach the bottom, backstitch. Now we have both sides of the placket sewn. This is what it looks like from the back. Both our plackets are sewn and ready to sew the sleeve together, but we'll do that in just a second. Now it's time to prepare the sleeves. Note that the interfacing is 2 inches wide. You can use one of the clear rulers to draw the interfacing. It's 2 inches by 10 inches. Once you have it sewn, once you have it pressed onto the fabric, you can draw a 3/8 inch seam allowance line on one edge of the interfacing. Then trim this seam allowance. Try to trim it very straight. Then fold it up along the edge of the interfacing and press it with your iron. After you've pressed it with your iron, take it to the sewing machine and top stitch it. Be precise and sew very straight, capturing the edge of the seam. Now I'm going to lay the seam on top of each other, right sides together, and sew up on the edge of the interfacing. Sew past the corner and then lift your needle, pull the fabric out, move, and then start sewing off the corner and sew straight right along the interfacing. It's important to be straight and accurate here because this is going to be the shape of your cuff. When you get to the corner, sew past once again, and then lift your presser foot and move the fabric. Start off of the corner and then sew straight along the interfacing and backstitch at the previously sewn seam. Now we can trim these seam allowances at a precise 1/4 inch. Cut all the way up, then cut along the top all the way across. Then cut the last side at a 1/4 inch. You can trim the corners to make it easier to turn inside out. Don't trim too close. Now we have our cuff. Fold the two seam allowances in the corner, pinch them with your fingers, and then push them to the other side. This helps prevent them from becoming wrinkled and folded over. Do the same thing on the other side. Fold one seam allowance, then the other. Pinch with your fingers, and then push to the front side. Then with your fingers, work the seams around. Press with your iron, making sure the outside fabric is overlapping the inside fabric, so you don't see it when you're wearing your shirt. Roll the fabric over and then press. Once you're done pressing, it's time to put the 1/2 inch seam allowance on this. We do it at the end because the fabric could be distorted with all the ironing and sewing. Trim this seam allowance so now it's very precise. Now I'm going to flat fell seam the sleeve, put the wrong sides together, and then precisely sew approximately 1/2 inch. Back stitch at the end. Then trim the top seam allowance close to the stitching. Roll it over, capturing the trimmed raw edge of fabric, and then with your iron, press it down so it's nice and even. Use your fingers to roll it around, and then the iron will press and hold it in place. Here we have it all pressed and ready to sew. When you're sewing it, you need to make sure that you don't sew the sleeve together. So put your fingers underneath and pull the fabric out, and then re-straighten the top fabric. Keep checking as you sew that you're sewing the seam straight, capturing the edge, and then also not sewing the fabric underneath. This is a short piece of a sleeve, so it's a little easier than sewing a full sleeve, but still be careful. So all the way up to the end. Now you're ready to attach the sleeve. Notice that I have the right side of the facing touching the wrong side of the interior sleeve. You know you're right if you pinch the sleeve allowances and then fold the cuff out so it looks correct. Also notice that I'm leaving a little bit of space of the cuff past the edge. Then sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Keep going down until you get close to where the pleat is marked on the pattern. I've marked it with a Sharpie in this demonstration. When I get close, I'll stop sewing, and then I'll line up the cuff on the other edge of the fabric. And then I am folding it in to make a pleat. Be careful and precise. This pleat is adjustable to make sure that your cuff is the right length of your shirt and that the shirt sleeve tapers into the cuff. Once you have everything laid down, then continue sewing your 1/2 inch seam allowance. Take your time and be as accurate as you can. Make sure everything is flat and square. Be careful not to catch the top part of the sleeve when you sew to the end. Now it is time to fold the sleeve around and pull the pre-finished edge up over the previous stitching. Take your time and fold it around, and then stitch along the edge, readjusting the seam as you go across the sleeve. You should sew straight and along the edge. Fold up the cuff, and it will capture the previous stitching. Keep working all the way to the end. Make sure you tuck any stray fabric and seam allowances underneath the cuff, and then stitch it in place. Back stitch at the end. You can also top stitch the edge of the cuff to make it more durable and for decoration. This is up to you. Work your way around and stitch nice and straight. Leave your needle down to pivot in the corners. Now your sleeve is ready for buttons, which I'll show you how to sew in a future lesson. Add some Velcro or other attachment to the top of your sleeve cuff and wear it with a t-shirt. It should be a new fashion style.